It is possible to get zoomers through the loading doors and into outside areas. If we try to take a zoomer through a loading door, the loading door will immediately close before we have a chance to enter. We also can't kick the zoomer in through the door without destroying it first. However, if we get the zoomer out of bounds, we can clip into the small room between the loading doors. When we approach one of the doors while on the zoomer, nothing happens. But, once we dismount the zoomer, the door begins to open and the zoomer disappears. This happens because while we're in the small loading room, the game is unloading assets from the city level we just came from and is loading in assets for the level we're about to enter. The zoomer happens to be one of the assets from the city level, so as the city level deloads, so does the zoomer. Therefore, we cannot bring the zoomer into a location outside of the city. It is possible to play as Jak during the spider section in Mars Tomb. While in Mars Tomb, we can get out of bounds through this pillar and make our way to the left side of the tomb. While still staying out of bounds, we'll come across this pool of dark eco. We need to clip into the side of this pool of dark eco with a precise dive. Once we are swimming in the dark eco, we need to ground pound into this room with the spider and take damage. We have now triggered an invulnerability glitch. We then proceed into the spider chase level with the invulnerability glitch still active, and we can walk right past the rolling boulder. Stand in this corner and let one of the small spiders attack you. At the end of their attack animation, jump once. Daxter will now turn into Jak. I swear to you, I have not changed anything in the code to make this happen. This can all be done on vanilla copies of the game, and it's actually used in speedruns of the game. Now that we are Jak, we go back into the spider chase area. For some reason, the boulder is now traveling very, very slowly. I waited for the boulder to get to the halfway point to crack open and reveal the spider, but it just got stuck there. I continued to the end of the area and nothing happened. I then tried jumping over to the middle area where the Praxis fight takes place, but the camera started going down when I tapped L1 on my jetboard, and Jak was suddenly returned to the area with the small spiders, as if the mission had been completed. In fact, I think it has been completed. So yeah, you can play and complete the spider section as Jak. You can skip the Praxis fight on the palace roof, but you need to complete the first phase of the boss fight first. After completing the first phase of the Praxis boss fight, and moving into the second phase, we are able to jump around the electrified gate and enter the third phase area early. From here, we can jump over this wall and enter what appears to be an unused fourth phase area. This area appears to be unfinished since this wall has no collision, and we can walk right through it. From here, we can jump over to the elevator shaft and ride it down to the bottom of the palace. Doing so will flag the boss fight as completed. When doing research for this video, I stumbled across a way to skip the entirety of the boss fight without having to complete the first phase of the fight. If we backtrack a little bit and perform what's called an ABBA bounce, we get over this wall and can start making our way towards the elevator shaft in the opposite direction. We do one more ABBA bounce and carefully slide to the edge of this plane. Do a punch uppercut from here and clip into the elevator shaft just like last time. And just like that, the entire boss fight has been skipped. So yes, we can skip the boss fight, but we don't need to complete the first phase. You can mount a zoomer as it is despawning. Near the stadium, there is a zoomer spawn point located out of bounds. We can get to this spawn point by simply going through this wall that doesn't have any collision and driving to the spot. Once here, we can load and deload the spawn area by rotating our camera. Each time we do this, a new zoomer will spawn in. Now, what happens when we jump on the zoomer, but the camera deloads it right before we fully mount it? Well, Jak freezes in the air, riding a non-existent zoomer. After a short while, the same zoomer Jak tried jumping on will spawn in nearby traffic in the city, and Jak will warp to that zoomer. But the zoomer spawned in with an NPC already riding it, so now Jak and the NPC are riding the zoomer together. The NPC has control over the zoomer, so we are unable to accelerate, steer, or dismount. However, we can still shoot our weapons. Doing so will damage the zoomer and eventually destroy it. Once destroyed, we are still unable to dismount, so we need to restart mission from the pause menu to reset Jak back to normal. So you can mount a zoomer as it's despawning, but with rather unusual side effects. The drill platform is modeled in the distant mountains. If we take the elevator up near Baron's Palace, we can see many other levels in the distance with low poly models. The question here is whether or not the drill platform has a low poly model. If we visit the drill platform level and take a look around, we can see that it is nested within a bunch of snow-covered mountains. Back at the Baron's Palace, we can see the snowy mountains in the distance, but no drill platform. We can enter FreeCam and further inspect the mountains, but alas, I was not able to locate a low-poly drill platform model. I think I'm looking in the right spot, but I could be wrong. But for now, this one is busted. It is possible to get rid of Erol during the Beat Erol in Race challenge. You can also beat the race without hitting any of the rings. In the first 10 seconds of the race, it is possible to push Erol off the track and get him stuck on these pipes under the overpass. If we try to continue the race while he's stuck, the game's rubber banding system will kick in and Erol will miraculously continue the race as normal. Instead, what we need to do is get Erol stuck on the pipes and stick around for about a minute and a half. As Erol struggles on the pipes, his zoomer will slowly take damage and eventually explode. This will remove Erol from the race and we're free to continue the race at our own pace. Now that he's out of the way, let's see if we can complete this race without hitting any of the rings. We first realize that once we skip a single ring, we have to skip the rest of the rings. Otherwise, we will fail the mission. Since we skipped the very first ring while pushing Erol onto the pipes, we will be skipping all of the rings. Once we reach the end of the race, it finishes like normal, and Erol is brought back from the dead to make an appearance in the cutscene. Rings are indeed optional.
Don't get too cocky, outlaw. Next time we race for keeps.
Different music plays when you have a weapon out, compared to not having one out. By lowering the sound effects volume, we are able to hear the in-game music with no interruptions. After taking out a weapon, the music suddenly has a raspier effect that now plays, giving the music a more tactical feel. Putting the weapon away will return the music back to normal. The music will also dynamically change while on the jetboard, playing a mix of chimes and beats on top of the original music. This dynamic music shift can happen on multiple occasions throughout the game. It can also happen in the first game, one example being a banjo and cowbell playing when near the farmer in Sandover Village. So yes, there is a slight change in music when Jak has his weapon out. You can get into Samos' hut during the first visit to Dead Town. The first time we visit Dead Town is when Torn sends us to retrieve the banner. Samos' hut is also located in Dead Town, so in theory we should be able to navigate over to the hut and visit it early. We can do a few movement techniques to make our way to the hut, but there isn't anything there. This is because the game checks whether or not a specific mission node later in the game is closed or not to determine if the hut should be spawned in. Since we are only on the third mission of the entire game, the hut does not spawn in. Unfortunately, we will have to wait a little bit longer to visit the hut. If you line up the two versions of Samos' hut, is there any overlap on the two maps? This one isn't really a myth, but it piqued my interest. I took aerial shots of both Sandover Village and Dead Town and lined them up based on the orientation of Samos' hut, and this was the result. I also put together this rudimentary combination of every area in the Precursor Legacy and the in-game maps of Haven City and Dead Town, and this is what I got. However, the pumping station area could possibly be overlapping on top of Sentinel Beach, so for now I guess there's no overlap. Jak will have his dark Jak horns in his reflection if he walks towards the Hip Hog mirror. If we visit the Hip Hog and go towards the mirror behind the bar, Jak doesn't appear to have any horns, but if we start walking or crouching, the horns will appear. Now, why does the reflection have horns but not Jak himself? This is because the reflection effect is achieved by having an entirely mirrored clone of the hip hog behind the mirror. This cloned area has copies of the character models that copy the movements of the characters in the main hip hog. However, I think a different Jak model is being used, possibly an earlier model where he still had horns? I don't know if this was necessarily an Easter egg, since the horns only appear when Jak is walking and crouching, so someone probably forgot to remove them from these animations or poses. Also, Jak appears to have these horns in an early promotional piece for Jak II. So I'm wondering if Jak was always meant to have these horns, but the developers changed their mind and forgot to remove them entirely from Jak's mirror reflection model. But yes, Jak does have horns if he walks towards the mirror. It is possible for all the racers in the class races to die and allow Jak to finish the race on his own. Considering how rare it would be for all of these class race NPCs to blow up, I decided to take things into my own hands. My first idea was to take the Ivan Vanko approach, where I would get off the zoomer with FreeCam and use the Peacemaker to destroy the oncoming vehicles. But doing this disabled the timer and laps were no longer counted. The next idea I had was to go into the game's code and change the bike's toughness factor to near 0. Now, if a bike slightly touches a wall or another bike, they will immediately explode. This took out all of the other racers in the very beginning of the race, and I was able to leisurely finish the race at my own pace. So yes, it is possible for all of the other racers to explode, and to finish the race at your own pace. In Destroy the Sewer Turrets, it is possible to reach the other side of the broken bridge as it's breaking. Yes. You can crash into the security barrier before it disappears. When Jak gains access to a new zone in Haven City, the colored security barriers will slowly disappear and allow Jak to pass through. But is it possible to go so fast that Jak crashes into the barrier before it disappears? Since nothing in the game travels fast enough to catch the barrier as it's disappearing, I had to make some code modifications to one of the city zoomers. Even with this increased speed, Jak was still unable to crash into the barrier. This is because the rate at which the barrier disappears is dependent on how close Jak is to the barrier, so no matter how fast we travel, the barrier will compensate and disappear faster as well. The barrier is busted.